that welcome back and welcome to a very interesting conversation we're going to have tonight. I thought, I don't know about you all, but I really thought a lot about last week's conversation, about all the great things that people said and commented about. And I thought everyone was very courageous and did a great job in really talking about, that concept of whiteness and racism. And we're going to take it a little step further tonight. And the topic for tonight is not that, there. Boing. Is the concept of the good and the bad binary, which really means relating to something that has two parts, right? Two parts, good or bad. And this concept really is a product of all the good work that was done as the civil rights era between 1955 or so and 1968. And the catalyst that really started the civil rights era in America was one of the activists was Rosa Parks. And that was in December 1955 when she refused to give up her seat on a public bus to a white man. And that really was kind of a catalyst event. And the civil rights movement was a struggle for justice and for equality for African Americans. And you had other prominent activists between that time of the 50s to the 60s, like Martin Luther King, Malcolm X, and the Little Rock Nine, and there was many, many others, right? And the civil rights era kind of ended with the assassination of Dr. King in 1968. And it kind of just, but there was a lot of things that happened in the country. There was a lot of focus on these peaceful protests and civic actions like you're seeing today that resulted in change, right? But one thing that happened with that deals with this good, bad binary is that it created in our mind that racism is bad, non-racism is not bad. Racism is tied with things like segregation. It's tied with like restricting access to voting. It's like, it was very clear. It was things that we wouldn't even think about today. That's how a lot of people, especially white people, view racism today. And I would even add in that it's this is Robin DiAngelo says it's her term, the good, bad binary, but I would also add in there, it's a perhaps then and now binary. Because I was talking to someone recently about, hey, did you know that when they said, we wrote that all men are created equal and liberty and justice for all, that didn't include people of color, didn't include women either, but didn't include people of color. And the response was, that was back then. That was back then. It's not that way now. And so in today's world, what Robin is saying is that racism is still here, and racism doesn't have to be, you can't think of it as good and bad, because if we have this, it's like white fragility. It's what, we get all excited and defensive when we're talking or being asked to talk about race, and it makes it really almost impossible if you think of it as a good or bad or then and now concept. Because as we all admitted during the first week or two, we are racist. We don't intend to be racist. You can't think that racism is an intentional act of hate or prejudice. It is, but there's also racism that is not. And that's what we're working through. That's probably the biggest struggle, is how do we bring this contemporary racism, this systemic racism that exists to the forefront? And Robin says you need to get rid of this, or you need to be aware of the good, bad, and I would say then and now, binary about racism. It exists now. It's systemic, sometimes unintentional. And then you get into this unintentional bias that we all have, our blind spots back here, that we don't intend to be, but sometimes we are. And so it's that's what we mean by the good, bad binary. Is that pretty clear? Because we're going to have you do some rounds of questions in a minute about that. And Fred, you want to add in before we go to rounds?
I think that, you know, there's some givens perhaps that we grew up with or that we heard about. And that includes that some things, some comments like racists are Southern white trash. That's one thing. Racists are ignorant. Racists are young or they're old. Racists are mean-spirited. Racists are rednecks. Good people are not racist. Good people are not racist. And the question, can you be a good racist? Good and racist, good and racist? And then there's another attitude about racism that's just history. And we talked about that early on, that, you know, we fought a civil war, the Civil War's over, and so that kind of ended all of it. So racism is just history. Well, after George Floyd's death, there were efforts to segregate people into one of two categories, either good or bad. And in America, what we often tend to do, whether, you know, and now we're talking about racism, we do this in so many things, and that's to categorize by characteristics, like, you know, like in a divorce between two people that leads to irreconcilable differences. And in fact, a contentious divorce can lead to more division and more hatred. This is not a bad analogy. Protests and riots become accepted expressions in the minds of many people because of systemic racism and police brutality. For others, it's offered an excuse for violence and destruction and looting. For some, Black Lives Matter is an entirely just cause, fighting against the perception that Black lives are seen as less valuable in the eyes of law enforcement or general society. For others, Black Lives Matter is seen as a violent political activist group who judge the validity of invalidity of death solely by the racial characteristics of victims and alleged perpetrators, while simultaneously perhaps ignoring a multitude of politically inconvenient victims and politically inconvenient perpetrators. Often discussion of Black Lives Matter is like a poker game. Okay, I'll raise you some other protest group and we'll change the direction of the whole argument. And that's one of the things that we heard about the Portland protests, that they were getting lost. The movement was getting lost. And so there was some discussion about that as time went on. So for some, Black Lives Matter is built solely upon the refusal to acknowledge the notion of racism at any level in our society or the existence of individual racists. For others, it's the acknowledgement that every innocent life that is lost is an avoidable tragedy which should be equally condemned, regardless of political implications. Extreme viewpoints are the only positions given any oxygen in a vicious political arena. And that's one of the things that perhaps as you think about, like the media, you know, what is reported? It's the blood and the gore and the guts. That's the thing that's newsworthy. And so that's something else that certainly today in this 24/7 news media, you know, if you think about it, going back to when Martin Luther King was leading the demonstrations in the 60s, you didn't have this 24/7 news cycle. And today, that's become a very important factor. The binary categorization suggests racism, which many claim to abhor. And this is the foundation, the binary aspect of this that remains in place. People are individuals, and until we judge actions and choices accordingly, we're going to be incapable of achieving justice for those who fall victim to racial violence. That's just the way it is. We'll be unable to distinguish protesters from rioters genuine activists from political opportunists. And make no mistake about it, for the people that are out there giving their hearts in the cities and in the towns, marching in the demonstrations and everything for what they believe, for the principles that they're trying to instill in America. There are those that are looking at the same movement and looking at it in a political tone. What opportunity does this give me? So consistent anti-racist from sporadic anti-racists. And is it important to even make that distinction? A consistent anti-racist to a sporadic anti-racist. And that's something that might be interesting to discuss in the groups. So those are some things that I've been thinking about, and I think perhaps you can take into your groups tonight as you go into breakout. And the first breakout is going to be right now, and we're going to take 15 minutes for it. And as you go into the groups, consider this: if as a white person I conceptualize racism as a binary and I place myself on the not racist side, what further action is required of me? What further action is required? Is it no action is required? I've done my job. I can go home now and forget about it. It's kind of like, well, we fought the Civil War, so now it's all over with. And so now I don't have to worry about it because I'm not a racist. So that's kind of the end of the matter. Therefore, racism is not my problem. It doesn't concern me, and there's nothing further that I need to do. And so think about that, and I think that will lead to some good discussion. And also, what are your thoughts and reactions to this statement? Also think about your own definition of racism. Does it align with a good-bad binary?
I just put that into the chat box so you can read it and you in your group, and you'll have 10 minutes, and then we're going to come out, and I'd like to hear from some groups, some people that would like to share for at least 5 minutes afterwards. So that's where the 15-minute comes from. Enjoy your breakout.